Hi, I'm Therese Grant, and I was asked to talk with you about the history of PCAP because I am the founder of PCAP and I'm the one who knows about the history from the beginning. So I will try to give you a short version of this. PCAP first started in 1991 at the University of Washington. And prior to that, for a number of years, I had been working with a professor at the University of Washington named Anne Streisguth. She's one of the people who originally identified fetal alcohol syndrome. I was working as a project manager and a caseworker on a study that Anne had looking at cocaine effects on kids who had been exposed during pregnancy. So my job was to enroll women who were heavy cocaine users and who had had a baby recently, and to stay in touch with them and trace them and go to their houses and pick them up and bring them into the university to our labs every 6 months so we could assess what the effects were on the kids who had been exposed to cocaine. So I was doing work that is kind of similar to what you all are doing, working with these high-risk moms, going out to their homes, trying to stay in touch with them. But we weren't doing intervention. We were just bringing the babies in to see how damaged they were, basically. So in the course of doing this, I really got to know these mothers well, and I really liked them. I was amazed at the women that I was working with, going into their homes and listening to their stories and hearing about the difficult life circumstances that they had and their parents who were substance users, and also being really impressed at the resilience and strength of these mothers. More than anything else in the world, they all wanted to be good mothers, but they didn't know how to do that because they had not been raised in any sort of a template that resembled normal family life or parenting. So as the cocaine study came to an end, Dr. Strasguth was assessing, what should we do next? Should we apply for another grant to keep following these kids up as they get older, or what should be the next step? And she was interested in my thoughts about this because I had become so engaged with the families. And I felt very strongly at that time that using cocaine during pregnancy was kind of a no-brainer. I mean, it's not good for the kids. It's not good for the family. So to me, continuing to assess the damage caused was not the most important thing. Instead, what seemed more compelling and important to me was how do you connect with these mothers? How do you intervene with them to help them avoid having more kids who were affected by alcohol or drugs or these other dysfunctional circumstances? So to me, what was the most important thing to do is prevention. So Anne Strasguth really was supportive of that idea. So we wrote a grant and we were funded by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, which is a federal organization, to do this project. In the beginning, it was called Birth to Three, and we had to change that name later because there was another program called that in Washington a few years later. So what we did is enrolled mothers who, same as our PCAP mothers who had used drugs and alcohol heavily during pregnancy and who were not connected to services. And we did this intervention that I had developed and that continues to evolve to this day. So we intervened with the mothers for 3 years. We also enrolled a control group of mothers who were very similar, but they got what we call the community standard of care, which is, CPS worker, public health worker, just whatever was in the community. So we did this project, and when it was over, we had good outcomes. The women who had been enrolled in the intervention group looked better at the end of the 3 years. We wrote a paper about that, and that was all fine and good. What wasn't fine and good is that when you have a good idea like this and you're developing something that seems to really work for an important public health problem, when the funding goes away, the project goes away. So there's So I was scrambling to connect with other colleagues to write more grants and, see how we could keep this project alive. In the meantime, right about that time, there was a really tragic circumstance in the Seattle area. There was a little girl who had been born to a mother who was a cocaine addict. They were not in our project. It was, they were outside of our project, but CPS had investigated and returned the girl home to her mother eventually, and the little girl ended up dead. She was abused, and she died in her mother's home. It was really tragic circumstance. There was an investigation about it, newspaper stories. A couple of people at the state level were fired because of the lack of oversight. So I called the local newspaper at that time, and the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, and talked to a reporter there and said, we have this project going on at the University of Washington that is about to end because our funding is gone. But we think that if Luria and her mom had been enrolled in our project, she wouldn't be dead now, because this is the kind of work that we do. And I told her about it. So the reporter, the paper sent a reporter out for over a week who followed one of our case managers around and interviewed her clients, and really learned a lot about PCAP. She wrote a beautiful story about PCAP, a long story in the Sunday paper on Thanksgiving weekend of that year. And a few days later, I had a phone call from a man who said he wanted to donate money to help us keep our program alive. And I thought, well, that's really nice, but you need quite a bit of money to keep a big intervention program funded and keep staff paid. Well, it turned out that this was many shares of a high wealth stock, and it was worth about $750,000. So it was just a terrific surprise and gift. We couldn't believe it. The University of Washington couldn't believe it. The newspaper reporter couldn't believe it. And the man and his wife wanted to remain anonymous. So I know who they are. They have visited PCAP a number of times, but they wanted to stay anonymous to the public. So this was great. So we were able to unpack our boxes and get started again doing our work. But there were some strings attached. And there were conceptual strings. And that was this concept that the problem of maternal substance use is not one that's going to be solved by federal grants that come and go and by philanthropists who happen to read a newspaper article and have a lot of money and decide to donate. I mean, that was just an amazing thing that happened. Instead, the issue about maternal substance use belongs to all of us. I mean, this is in our communities. These are our neighbors and our sisters and our friends and people who we know, people who live in our communities. And especially now that we had an idea of something that was really could be effective, which is the PCAP model, we really need to take responsibility for that, in our own communities, in our own counties. So what I started doing at that time, and what part of this, my responsibility, was to start connecting with state legislators, county commissioners, all the people who are in leadership positions in the Seattle area and the Tacoma area, which is where we were operating at that time, and persuade them that the state should, how about the state picking up funding for this so that it could continue in a more permanent way. And that's exactly what happened. It just slowly, in a very grassroots way, different counties in the state started to hear about PCAP. And when we spoke at conferences, they would hear about it. And people started going to their legislators and saying, hey, we have the same problem. We would like the same kind of help. Can we open a PCAP site here? And that's how PCAP grew in Washington State. So we have PCAP in 19 counties now, operating out of 15 sites. We have PCAP sites in numerous places outside Washington State. But in Washington, we are funded through the state legislature, through the Division of Behavioral Health and Recovery. And all of you here at this training today are part of the ongoing story of PCAP. We would not remain funded, and we won't remain funded in the future without continuing to do a really good job at what we do and collecting information about that. We have a story to tell, and we tell that through our data and also through our stories of what the work that we do with the women. But our PCAP evidence base, our data collection, our stat system are all absolutely critical to continuing the program, to continuing to serve families, and continuing to be funded. Because without the evidence that what we're doing actually works, the state will not continue to invest in our program. So with that, I will turn the training back over to the trainers. And thanks very much for being with us today.